Well, tonight's show, our topic is happening while we're talking about it. So we want to go to Jeff City via Google Hangout with a couple of journalists who have been covering this legislative session because it is still going on, and that's why they are there. Jason Rosenbaum from the St. Louis Beacon joining us once again, and Scott Fawn from the Missouri Times. 2 points of clarification before we get started. Hashtag MOLEG does not mean that we need either of you to show us any more leg. We would like you to keep your pants rolled down. And also, I believe the seersucker, we'll get to that in a little bit. That was a bit of a controversy, if you will, a little bit of some fun our lawmakers were having within the legislative body.
Casey, when I'm on with you, I always am wearing pants.
Okay, well, there we go.
And I'm a little disappointed. I was hoping to see some calf of Rosenbaum. That's kind of what I was on here for.
Very good. Congratulations. This show is officially off the rails. Thank you both for joining us. Good night, everyone. I'm sorry I started that. Okay, well, catch us up to speed. You guys are in Jeff City because this is all still going on. I know they went late into the night, last night and maybe another night before that. Are they still on the floor right now?
The House is not on the floor. They've left. They're waiting on some conference reports from the Senate. They'll be back at 10 a.m. The Senate still is deliberating. But you know what I keep hearing around the Capitol is it's a little bit anticlimactic. Most of the big issues that aren't done people are pretty pessimistic about them passing. So it's kind of a eerie quiet for people that have been around the building for a long time. What they tell me is that they just don't have a lot of confidence that a lot of the last minute deal cutting is going to amount to anything.
Yeah, anticlimactic is a good word to use for this, mainly because, you know, anybody who's been around the Capitol these last couple of days of session will know that people are always racing and hurrying to get some big, important bill done. And while there are still bills that are left outstanding, a lot of the big priorities like tax cut, like second injury fund fix, and other ones, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, those have been done for a couple of days now. So it does have an eerie calm to it. And I've even had some moments today where I felt like I should be doing more or writing more, because around this time usually a lot is happening, and stuff is still happening, but just not to that rocket ship importance that it usually happens.
Okay, so what has gotten done? You brought up a couple of things there. Tell us what are the big headlines that you see as far as what's been accomplished, what's been passed? Not that something has to pass to be considered an accomplishment.
Absolutely, because some people would argue that, you know, lots of bills coming out of the legislature might not be a good thing. But some off the top of my head is that aforementioned change the second injury fund. While that may not be an issue that sets the world afire, they've been literally trying to fix that issue for a few years now without success. And that ended up passing and going to the governor's desk today. That kind of fixes a vexing problem with a fund that typically helps injured workers. And this tax cut bill that passed last week, that was a major priority for both the House and the Senate. It cut personal income taxes, business taxes, and corporate income taxes. The big question is if Nixon vetoes it like he signals that he would, whether they're going to try to override it in September. And I think that's going to be the biggest ticket when that showdown occurs.
The injury funding you're referring to, that goes way back to, I believe, World War II times, and that's something that there's been talk about reforming and fixing, if you will, for quite some time. And
Absolutely.
Then, and Rod, go ahead. I'm sorry. And by the way, Rod, that was your tweet we saw just a minute ago. I'm sorry, Scott, Rod is with your publication, Scott. Forgive me.
Absolutely, yes.
So if you want to clarify anything on that from the Missouri Times perspective on the tweet there, I don't know if he's giving the inside scoop on what that was.
I would never venture an attempt at clarifying or even really describing Rod's tweets.
Okay, fair enough. Moving on. Okay, so keeping with the conversation then, what else has been accomplished, either by way of passage or not?
Well, I think you can point, I think the second injury fund is not a very sexy issue, but it certainly is a hugely important one to the state. You had a lot of interest groups involved. I think there's a lot of business groups that aren't happy, but at the end of the day, I think all of them would agree that having some resolution to it is better than the situation the can's been kicked down the road for several years now. You know, a lot of the stuff I found the most interesting to cover this session was things that did not happen. There were several attempts to change the PSC's role in regulating electric rates. That's not happened until it brought some drama this evening through the gas ISRS. There was apparently a deal worked out to pass gas ISRS, but take out a tracker provision. The chairman of the Utilities Committee got on the floor, very heated speech, condemned several of the members that have traditionally been on the side of the employers against the utilities. And it ended up being a 77-77 tie. No one could remember seeing one of those. So that provision, it was an interesting thing. The majority leader, speaker, several of the more influential members of the large sophomore class voted to amend the bill and take off the tracker. Most of the Democrat caucus and then some of the utility supporters put together an interesting coalition to make the vote tied. So at that point, the majority leader immediately laid the bill over.
There was also a little bit of back and forth within the Republican Party, too, being that they control the House and the Senate concerning education. And I believe we saw some news coming out just literally in the last hour or so. Can you catch us up to speed on what's going on there? Some changes in education legislation that really we haven't seen in this state in quite some time.
And really, it's the interesting part about those bills is they affect mostly St. Louis and Kansas City, so Jason would probably be very good to address that.
Well, there had been several instances throughout the session, which Scott's publication detailed, where so-called education reformers tried to change the way teacher evaluations and tenure went forward. But those efforts didn't go anywhere. In fact, when they were on the House floor, they failed outright. And I think what ended up passing in recent days is a different education bill that changes how unaccredited school districts can kind of be taken over by the state or can essentially lead out of unaccreditation. And that to me is probably going to be something that people kind of mull over after the session ends, for sure.
And some of what Scott was just talking about before then, there's a lot that goes on that does not grab the headlines. Talk about liquor laws. We've got highways have been discussed and how we fund our highways. Some of the things that people may not have heard about so far this session that the legislature spent a lot of time on.
One thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, Scott, but one thing I really wanted to mention that hasn't gotten a lot of attention that did pass was legislation that effectively abolished St. Louis City and St. Louis County's foreclosure mediation ordinances. The 2 or 3 people that follow St. Louis County government know that when that was passed last year, that was a major, major thing the county council did. And this bill that was supported by both Republicans and some Democrats ended up getting to Jay Nixon's desk, admittingly, surprisingly, without a filibuster in the Senate. And Democratic senators told me, especially those who support foreclosure mediation, think that that's a way to help people stay in their homes. They were told by the governor's office or indirectly that the governor was going to veto that, but it passed both chambers by huge majorities. So that'll be something that may only affect St. Louis and St. Louis County, but it's definitely something that's going to have an impact if the governor signs it or if it's overridden.
I want to bring up something real quickly because we have just under a minute to talk here, but Medicaid is something we've talked a lot about on this program. The governor's talked a lot about all around the state. Did they talk about it much in our legislature?
I would say that's one story where the headlines were very much more plentiful than the serious discussion amongst the leadership in the bodies. I'm not sure that there was ever a time when the leadership of either the House or the Senate seriously considered expanding Medicaid. I think it was discussed. I think they were certainly asked many questions about it. The governor, the Missouri Chamber, the Hospital Association all weighed in. But I think there's some plans for it to go after in the interim and then come back with a reform plan. They talked about some reform, but actually expanding Medicaid to the point where you'd qualify for these federal funds. I don't know that was actually discussed in the halls of this building as much as it was discussed other places. So that was one that's not, now one that did not maybe get as much ink, but was discussed heavily was the liquor bill for I guess it helped major brands, a St. Louis employer. I just spoke to the mayor of St. Louis yesterday, who was in the halls for the second time I know of, and one of the main reasons was to lobby support for that bill. So that's one where the coverage was maybe not on what was happening.
All right, I'll jump in there, Scott.